All right, we're going to talk a little bit more about that song later, but I like to start things with it. And as Michael stated, I get to do some pretty unique things, and I want to first of all thank you for inviting me to be a part of this. Anything involving creatives and getting a chance to talk about things that involve us and things that we create for other people is a really near and dear passion to my heart. The title of this, it's a little strange, but hopefully I'll be able to help you make sense of it and make sense of it as I go along. So I've got some notes, but I may go off-road if that's okay at times and just kind of speak from the heart. It's called Fireflies and Hurricanes, Finding Your Calling Without Losing Your Wings. All right. And speaking of, things that fly, moths, flies, different things like that, you've probably heard the old story about the guy who thought he was a moth. And he was in the dentist's office, and he told the dentist, he said, I think I'm a moth. The dentist said, well, you're in the wrong place. You should go see a psychiatrist. And he said, well, I am seeing a psychiatrist. And he said, well, why are you here? And he said, well, your light was on. So it was either that or a drummer joke. But I do hope this morning that through our short time together, that the light will hopefully turn on for some of you as it did in my life. It's always interesting at parties and different things when people ask me what I do. And I love it because I always pretty much get the same response when I tell people what I do. I say I'm the recording studio producer at Cook Children's Hospital. And it's almost like, the dog do the head tilt. And then at the same time, there's almost this kind of wispy look that comes over their face as if I work in, Willy Wonka's chocolate factory or something like that. And so it really is a cool opportunity to get to explain to people, what it's about. So for those of you who don't know, we do have a recording studio in the hospital, a full-fledged commercial recording studio. We also have a broadcast studio, full production, that would rival some television stations, all within our child life zone. So the recording studio, which I had no idea, I had never been to Cook Children's, I didn't know anything about Cook Children's. I had never even, if I can recall, I don't think I've ever been through Fort Worth when I'd heard about the opportunity. And my family and I, we moved from Houston to be a part of it. The studio really was the vision of our CEO, Rick Merrill. He's actually a really good country songwriter. And he had the vision of putting the studio in the hospital, and people thought he was absolutely bonkers. Like, why would you do that? But when you step into the hospital and you see this place, this creative space, and how it operates, and many of you know the power of music and what it does. So when you step in there and you see this space, you begin to see how much sense it actually makes. And he and my partner in crime, Sonny Burgess, were able to get the attention of Garth Brooks and Troy Aikman. There's an organization called Teammates, which a lot of child life zones are a part of. So Garth Brooks got on board, and if I am not mistaken, Sonny has told me this, that Garth's engineer actually came and laid out the grid of the studio. So it's laid out extremely well. It's a recording studio producer's dream. There's power outlets every 2 feet, or actually like every few steps. And so Garth got on board and became a big part of why the studio is there. So I just want to give a shout out to Garth and thank him for that. So what happens in this space? As you can imagine, we do a lot of things, from songwriting to recording, producing music with patients. We've actually produced, I want to get this right, 3 kind of full-length CDs to date. We've done 4 Christmas EPs. We've done 2 complete lullaby CDs for our NICU that we give out. And those CDs are like, for those of you watching who don't know what CDs are, they're like big albums. They shrunk them. And we used to have all these things we put up in the visor of our car, CDs. They're amazing, but they're coasters now. But yeah, we still give out CDs to parents and families of our NICU every Christmas. We have studio exploration. which is where patients can come down during the day. We have, it looks like Guitar Center in there, y'all, I'm not kidding. So patients can come down and explore the area. We do podcasts with our physicians, Doc Talk podcast that we've started. And then most notably, at least also very near and dear to my heart, that we're going to talk about a little bit later, are heartbeat recordings. So I don't want to get ahead of myself. We'll come back to that. So people ask me, okay, what do you do aside from all the technical acumen and all of the crazy things that we have there? What do you do? And so I've encapsulated in what I feel like my calling there is to do, is to provide a megaphone, or in this case, a microphone, to those who feel like they have no voice or who feel like they haven't been heard. So I feel like that, out of everything that we do, when you hear the music, when you hear the different things that we do, it's really to provide a megaphone and a voice for those who feel like they have no voice. So the song that I started with was actually a song written by a patient and that we recorded there at the hospital. It was actually 3 patients involved. And we didn't get to the rap part. But this song, and I like to start with it because it really does illustrate a lot of what we do in that space. So this patient came in, I met her in probably 2016, and she was walking down the hallway and, with her dad. And then she came in, she was super, super shy. And I got her to sing something for me. And I saw her a few times over the years, but then in 2019, I believe, so she came back to the studio. This time she was in a wheelchair. And she came into the studio, she recorded a song like the day before this one. And she came back the next day because she wanted to write something a little more upbeat. And so she sat down, or she was in her wheelchair, she sat right next to the console. And I didn't know she was coming down that day, so I wasn't prepared. So I was turning, flipping switches, how we do, turning on gear and all this stuff. And she said, "I'm ready." I was like, "What do you mean you're ready? I'm still turning on stuff here." Like, what? And so she had this song idea, so I put down a few chords and stuff just to get the basic idea, with the goal of having her come back in later to record the real vocal. So she recorded that vocal to some very basic chords that I did, and I came back behind it and produced it. And I don't know if you heard the hype man, the wake up, get up, get up. So that was another patient who came in about a couple of months later, and I said, "Hey, I'm working on this song. Would you like to throw something down on it?" I called him Rico Suave because he came down every day at about 3 o'clock. He didn't have anything else to do, came down from his room, but every hair was in place. And he was cool. So I was like, "Man, you are too cool. You have to throw something on this track." And so that was his contribution. And then we didn't get to the other section, but a couple of months later, there was another patient who raps. And we had a songwriting camp at the hospital. She rapped in the middle of that. And as we got done, I was preparing for the CD release of this song. And I hadn't worked on the song in a couple of months. I opened it back up. And when I opened the file up, no joke, about an hour or so after opening the file, one of the child life specialists called down to the studio and said the original patient who had written the song was in the hospital. And I was like, "Oh my goodness, I need to bring this up, let her hear how the song is taking shape," because she had told me how she wanted some of the sounds and different things, wanted it to be real upbeat. And I said, "I'm going to come up there and see her." And they said, "Well, she just passed away." And I said, I had her file open. I was working on the song. So she never got to hear the song, but in many ways, I do believe she got to hear the song. And these 3 patients never actually got to meet each other. So they all contributed to the song, but they never met. And so I shared that story because like I said, it encapsulates this intersection of technology and all the cool stuff that's in that space, but it means nothing if we're not capturing the voices of these patients. And I didn't realize at the time, I think she knew, but I didn't realize that what I captured of her in that wheelchair sitting next to the console, which in my mind was just the scratch vocal, ended up being the only vocal, the last thing she ever sang on this earth, that we were able to capture and bring that song to life. Sparklefly Studio. Usually whenever I name something, I like to wait. Some people like to come up with a mission statement, and that drives what they do. Over the years, when I've been a part of things, I usually wait until about a year or a year and a half. And my mission statement, or the conceptually branding, whatever you want to call it, comes out of what I've been doing and where I want to go. So it's not necessarily I just come up with something and go, okay, everybody line up with this. It really is, okay, what am I actually doing? What's happening where I am, and where do I want to go? So Sparklefly, it's a kind of a play on the whimsical concept of a firefly. And the reason I chose that is because over the course of my first year or year and a half there, I started to realize that these patients who come in, they have so much hope and they are so inspiring. And in essence, they're like fireflies. They come in, and when you hear their stories, I mean, it would decimate, it would lay you out if you heard some of their stories, but you wouldn't know that by looking at them. And I started thinking about the concept of fireflies and how they usually only come out at dusk. You only see them against the backdrop of something that's very dark, but they're such an anomaly because you don't plug them in, right? They light up, and you're like, such a curious thing that they light up this field, but they're not plugged in. And I begin to realize these patients are like fireflies. Their lives are set up against the backdrop of incredibly dark circumstances and what they're going through and what brought them into the hospital. But they light up that place. And so Sparklefly hence became the moniker for the studio. And then also the sparks of ideas that they bring, because they may come in with a line to a song, they may come in with a verse or a chorus, a spark of an idea. And I love being able to take those sparks of ideas and see what we can breathe on them. So it's kind of a dual meaning there. The next question inquiring minds want to know is, how did you get into doing this? I didn't get into this. This really found me. I've been in music all my life. I joined band in 7th grade at the behest, or really my English teacher got really mad at me, right? Just call it what it is. And I was tapping on my desk, and so she got really, really upset one day. And she said, short lady, I still remember her today. She said, if you're going to tap on your desk, why don't you go join the band? And I thought, sounds like a good idea. I'll go join the band. So 7th grade, I walked into the band hall, and no joke, when I stepped foot into that band hall, I knew music was what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. I didn't know anything about music, but I knew in that moment that's what I was going to do. And so, 7th grade, shout out to my English teacher, if she's still out there. This is for you. I was raised by my grandmother during that, from birth, pretty much birth up until the time I was 16. And so music was my life. It was all I had. And I love this quote by Maya Angelou. She said, "Music was my refuge. I could crawl into the space between the notes and curl my back to loneliness." And that's what I did. Music became like air and water, and really for me it was survival during that time. And I didn't think I would ever write music or do anything that would be heard by anyone. But I remember distinctly during that time, whenever I sat down to play, I always felt like someone was watching me and smiling over me. And I didn't know what it was at the time, but that was the drawing that kept me at it. So I did what everyone else does. I went to college, studied music, University of Houston, go Cougs, shout out. And graduated from there, and then went to Arizona State, Sun Devils. But notably during that time in college, I was more known for, instead of music, I was more known for being more of like a Steve Urkel lookalike. I could tell you story after story after story of being mistaken for Steve Urkel. I would hope by now to have outgrown that, but no, not really. Continued to travel, toured for a number of years, and then in 2003, I remember I lost my job that I was working at, and went into this really, really dark time. And I'll never forget a neighbor who was working for Apple brought over a computer, and in his way of helping, and he wanted me to learn the recording software. And I didn't even want a Mac computer at that time. I didn't know what a Mac computer was back in 2003. Can you believe that? And he brought it over, and that was, I'm telling you, that changed the trajectory of my life. Getting that computer and learning that recording software, and it started me on this trajectory of stepping from this side of the glass in recording and performing to this side of the glass and starting to put sounds together and create things. And one of the lessons I've learned from the Fireflies, as I call them, as I recount during this time, is that the pain in your past can often quench the hope of your future if you let it. The pain of your past can often quench the hope of your future. So at that point in my life, hope was very difficult to come by. I felt like it was probably like a few months ago, trying to fill up your tank when gas was, $10. It was really, really difficult, and I was in a very dark place. I actually didn't ever think I would do music again at that time. I was planning on selling my music equipment. I thought, I don't know what I'm going to do. And I remember even working on a song for a young artist during that time that I thought, I just know she's going to be this breakout artist, and it's going to be like all the thing I've been waiting for. And I'll never forget her dad. I was putting so much into it, and her dad, at one point towards the end, he got super frustrated, and he said, I don't understand why you're doing all of this. We're just trying to get a really decent demo to get this into the hands of a real producer. Oh, yeah. Yeah, y'all, I broke. I think at that point, that was, if there was a bottom of the barrel, I think that's where my head was pressed up against, the absolute bottom. But in that secret place that we as creatives know, there was still this ember of something. I had no idea what it was, but just knowing that there was something else that I would be doing at some point, but I couldn't see it at that point. What else have I learned from the Fireflies? Pain wants your voice, to diminish it at best and to silence it at worst. That's why music and recording have become so important to me. I love this quote by Beethoven. He says, "From the heart, may it return to the heart." And as I stated before, out of all the amazing things I get to do at the recording studio, for me, the real pinnacle of it are the heartbeat recordings. Now, people ask me, what are the heartbeat recordings? So what we do, we were able to find a really powerful stethoscope. And so we take the heartbeat recordings of terminal babies, young children, even teenagers, and we've actually taken the heartbeat of young adults who've been treated at the hospital since they were babies. And we take those heartbeats, we talk with the parents and find out something that's meaningful to them. A song, it can be anything, a pop song, rock song, Barney song, doesn't matter what it is. And then we meet with the music therapist, and we recreate those songs based on whatever the tempo of the heartbeat is. So it's a production from the ground up, and we've done, like I said, we've done country, we've done all of that. We did have a patient who, and sometimes the patients and families get to come in and hear the songs. Sometimes we send out the digital file to them. I remember we've only had probably 2 patients who've actually had the opportunity to come back into the studio to hear the final version. And one of them was a patient who he wanted the Star Spangled Banner, Lady Gaga's version. So we used that version. We didn't recreate it. We used that version. And the mom wanted some audio files from video clips of where she sang to her son. So I pulled the audio files, so she wanted those interspersed throughout the recording. And once I got it all done, they were able to come back into the studio and hear the final result. And as I said, that's a rarity, and time is of essence when we do those. And in particular, this one was too, because the patient was able to hear it about 2 or 3 weeks before they were then playing it at his funeral. And capturing these heartbeats, when we get the call to get one, we have to go get it right then and there, because we may not have 30 minutes or an hour to get it. So I wanted to, if I could, share some of those so you have the opportunity to hear a little bit of that. Is that okay? I remember Channel 8 or News 8 did a segment on the heartbeat songs. And I'll never forget, we went through the interview and it was amazing. They handled it so well, and they turned off the cameras. And I'll never forget the one who was interviewing as they were packing up. She asked me, she turned around and just kind of like a Columbo, one of those last minute things. She said, why do you do this? Oh my goodness. And I remember that moment because I hadn't let myself go to that place. And I remember when she asked that question, I remember I started just, and I told her about the story of losing our first daughter, who was a stillbirth. And up until that point, I don't think I knew why I was doing that, but I hadn't really I hadn't put it into words to anyone. So when she asked the question, it kind of opened the floodgates. And I was able to share with her, how incredible it is that sometimes as creative people, we go through a lot of things, we endure a lot of things, but I had no idea that the very thing that years ago, when we went to the ultrasound to hear the one thing that you want to hear that we didn't get to hear, that now, these many years later, that very same sound I would be sitting with, and I would be giving that sound back to other families. And as a gift, what we wanted to hear forever, now I'm able to give that back to other families for them to have forever. And we got pregnant again 2 years later, and we were leaving the hospital with a seemingly healthy baby, and we were literally walking out of the hospital doors with our son, and he started having a seizure. And we turned around, walked back into the hospital. He was in the NICU for a month. Neonatal seizures, unexplainable. And they said, yeah, he's never going to play sports. He's autistic and all these different things. Well, during that time, I started diving into music and frequencies and putting together a CD of music for him and playing that over him. And I'm going to say my son is now in his 3rd or 4th year of basketball, played on a select team this past year. I say all that to say, because we've been talking about this month's theme of depth. And here's what I want to say overall, and there's still a lot more. For the sake of time, I'll cut this short. But the greater the depth of your calling, the greater the depths of the valleys sometimes you must traverse or walk through. Not necessarily because you did anything wrong, but because what was happening to you was happening for you. And more importantly, even sometimes not just for you, but sometimes for those downstream who will need the light that you have inside of you. I had no idea that those things that we went through, that they would be such a part of what I'm doing now. And if you had told me, I would have said you are a lunatic. But I had no idea that losing our daughter, that I would be working with heartbeat recordings. I had no idea that my son getting that diagnosis, that I would have patients come into the studio who have autism, and watching a mother standing in front of me in tears because her son was connecting with an instrument in a way that he had never connected with another person. There's a picture of my family, and that's our oldest son here, Isaiah, Elijah, my wife Maria, and then a friend of ours, is a dog we were watching that day, but he made, I mean, yeah, he's like he's part of the family, but he's perfectly in the middle, like photobomb. Yeah. I was going to cut it out, but I thought, nah, it's fine. Her name is Maya. Yeah. Yeah, she's got the camo outfit. But that's my family. Because we're talking about fireflies, we're talking about hurricanes, the eye of the storm, and being from Houston, I am very familiar with hurricanes. And we survived a couple, Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Ike. And one of the things that I've often wondered is what happens to birds and fireflies during hurricanes. You ever wonder about that? I remember during Hurricane Ike, we had trees down, power out, and we walk out in our front yard. I'll never forget, there was a bird's nest still intact in a tree. And I was like, we need to build houses like bird's nests. But I was reading this thing, is interesting. It says, as a hurricane marches across the ocean, seabirds concentrate in the eye of the storm. And they get there the same way migrating land birds do, by flying downwind. In the increasing gales that spiral toward the storm center, they fly there until they break out into the calmness of the eye. And then rather than fight the winds, they stay within the eye of the hurricane as it moves. And I thought that was incredibly profound, to stay with the eye. Stay with the eye. Because whether or not you believe that someone is watching over you, I believe that for you. And one of the other cool things that I get to do, and I'll close with this. We're encountering so many patients, and not just patients, but people in general who are going through a lot of mental health crises. I think right now suicide is like the number 2 killer amongst teens, 10 to 14, and that bookend may have expanded, but I know it's definitely, as people are stepping out of like COVID bunkers into this post-COVID apocalyptic world where relationships have become so fragmented, it's a lot. And one of the cool things that I get to do is, in our hospital, we have a partial hospitalization program in the psych units. And so I go up every other Friday, and I do drum circles up there. We have an inpatient unit and an outpatient unit. And so I go around the different units to 4 different groups, and I do drum circles. And one of the things that I do is I have a slew of drums. And after I demonstrate the drums, oftentimes before we put the patients in a drum circle, I do a couple of sound effect type things. And this is one of the sound effect instruments I play for them. And one day, or actually, let me play the sound for you. So you guys are going to be in a simulation of our drum circle. Y'all cool with that? Yeah. Okay, so here's what I need for you to do, and this is exactly what I tell the patients. So I'm going to have you be super still, which you are. Very quiet, which you already are. I'm going to have you close your eyes, And I'm going to see if this instrument, which produces a sound you would normally hear outdoors, if your brain can fool you into thinking you're really hearing that sound indoors, even though you know it's something you would hear outdoors. All right, and normally, I know some of you are wanting to steal this rain stick, right? So typically after I play that sound, I'll ask the patients, what did you hear? And they'll often say, rain, or sounds like someone frying bacon, or, ice in a hailstorm, or one that I've gotten, it sounds like Skittles at the end of a rainbow. And I'm like, okay. And so one day in particular, I don't know why I asked this question, which I didn't think I would get as much of a response as I normally do. But I played the sound and I said, where were you? And I thought they were going to roll their eyes or not understand what I was asking. But as I went around and I said, where were you? And I got rainforest. I got, sitting on the porch or whatever. But there was one kid. And I said, hey, where were you? And he said, I was standing outside in my front yard in the rain with my arms outstretched after a hurricane. That's the firefly in the hurricane. And I thought we all sat there for a minute, including staff, and we were just like, whew, standing outside in my front yard with my arms outstretched in the rain just after a hurricane. How do you find your calling without losing your wings? I think it's counting or not discounting everything that you have to travel through, knowing that at some point on the other side of this hurricane, the storm will end, and there is an eye of the hurricane in the middle of it. But if there's anything I can encourage you with, is this, and what I've learned throughout the hurricanes, is that oftentimes the very things that we would want to not do as creatives during that time are the very things that we should be doing during those times, because when you don't feel like you have anything to give, when you give what you want to see on the other side of it, that's where the blessing is. That's where the blessing is. So I consider you all fireflies, sparkleflies. So keep shining your light. And thank y'all so much for listening and allowing me to share a little bit about what we do. So thank you.